The number of dead and wounded in the ranks of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war is already approaching 1 million. But this does not affect the attitude of most Russians to the war and does not encourage them to protest. This was stated in an interview with Glavred by military political observer of the information resistance group Alexander Kovalenko. The reason here is also in psychological moments. Even being in this capsule, a closed information space, Russians still hear about big losses. Even Z military sometimes talk about the real number of losses, complain that it is a disgrace. At this rate, we will soon run out. What, Kiev? We will soon run out Dnipropetrovsk, he points out. Kovalenko emphasized that modern Russian society is different from what it was in the late 80s and early 90s when people went out to mass protests with Molotov cocktails and rebar in their hands. Today's Russians will not go out into the streets without a push from an influential internal force, primarily a security agency, because there is virtually no real political opposition in Russia. According to the expert, only if someone from the security wing is interested in a change of power, in particular in removing Putin, will a protest movement be launched, and the people themselves will never take to the streets. Russians are an amorphous, spineless mass. They need stimulation from outside or from within, and this stimulation can only be organized by a certain person or force that has power and influence. He concluded, in this case, the United States has assured European officials that Washington is prepared to impose sanctions on aggressor Russia that the Americans have promised to launch if the Kremlin refuses to end its war in Ukraine. The Trump administration's stance on Moscow is hardening, with some officials arguing that Putin is blocking peace. Bloomberg's report says that European officials are frustrated with Trump's stance on new sanctions against Russia. Trump needs to understand Moscow's lack of serious plans for peace, after which the US should take decisive action. According to journalists, Washington's position towards Russia has hardened. The White House considers Putin the main obstacle to a peace agreement. Moreover, journalists write that American officials, during meetings with Europeans in Turkey this week, expressed their readiness to launch sanctions against Russia after Moscow announced that it was sending a low-level delegation to the talks. I hope that next week we get some movement on this, because Putin has not been able to come to the table. President Trump has made it clear that he is positive about sanctions. Our European allies are very supportive of him, and I think the moment is now, said Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democratic Party member.
European leaders have agreed with US President Donald Trump that Russia's position in ceasefire talks is unacceptable and they intend to coordinate a response, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Friday. We just had a meeting with President Zelensky and then a phone call with President Trump to discuss the developments in the negotiations today, and the Russian position is clearly unacceptable, Starmer told reporters. As a result of that meeting with President Zelensky, under discussion with President Trump, we are now closely aligning and coordinating our responses and will continue to do so, he said, as European leaders held a summit in Albania. According to Associated Press, he said the decision with Trump was also agreed on with the leaders of France, Germany, and Poland. Macron confirmed, there will be new talks among us in the coming hours.
Il faut sans doute aller chercher le...
Oui.
Je suis allé faire des images là.
So we just had a meeting with President Zelensky and then a phone call with President Trump to discuss the developments in the negotiations today. And the Russian position is clearly unacceptable and not for the first time. And so as a result of that meeting with President Zelensky and the discussion with President Trump, we are now closely aligning and coordinating our responses and will continue to do so.
Alors, un mot pour la presse française pour dire, comme vient de le rappeler Monsieur le Premier ministre, que tous ensemble, comme il y a quelques jours à Kiev, nous avons, avec le président Zelensky, fait retour des rendez-vous qui s'étaient tenus à Istanbul, où la délégation russe a décidé d'exclure la délégation américaine. Nous avons ensemble, à l'instant, eu une discussion avec le président Trump pour d'abord tous considérer qu'il était inacceptable pour une deuxième fois que la Russie, le président Poutine, ne réponde pas aux demandes qui ont été faites par les Américains, soutenus par l'Ukraine et les Européens. Pas de cessez-le-feu et pas de rendez-vous à un niveau décisionnel et pas de réponse sur le cessez-le-feu. Et donc dans ce contexte, nous allons continuer de nous coordonner avec nos partenaires européens, la coalition des volontaires et les États-Unis. Il y aura dans les prochaines heures des nouveaux contacts et des retours et nous apporterons les réponses requises. Nous continuons de nous battre pour la paix et nous continuons d'être aux côtés du président Zelensky et de nous coordonner très étroitement avec les États-Unis d'Amérique.